The Extraordinary Adventures of Captain Nicholmouse, written and narrated by Fiona Julian, and dedicated to aspiring adventurers and inventors everywhere. Home again. Captain Nicholmouse, pilot, adventurer and inventor. That's exactly what's written on this mouse's rather well-used passport. You see, the thought of following a career in business just didn't seem very exciting to him. Instead, Captain Nicholmouse had chosen to travel to far-off places, eager to see and learn new things. It was on a visit home from South America that his life took an unexpected change. Sadly, his beloved great-aunt Maud suddenly passed away, and, to his surprise, she left him a large amount of money. Captain Nicholmouse had always enjoyed visiting his great-aunt and chatting over tea and her wonderful home-baked cakes. But great-aunt Maud had worried about her nephew's adventurous lifestyle. His letters home spoke of jungles and wild animals. She had thought that it would be far better for him to have a nice, safe job in town, where there are telephones and baths and things, and so she offered him a job in the family accountancy firm. "Why don't you let me call the office?" she said. "You know there's a job waiting for you." Captain Nicholmouse replied with a charming but quite mischievous grin on his face. "I'd rather be back in the piranha-filled rivers of Peru." It was of little surprise to the rest of the Nicholmouse family that great-aunt Maud had made one condition in her will. The money she had left to her nephew could only be used to start a business. She'd even appointed a business advisor from the family accountancy firm to help with any new venture. So, in a few short weeks, Captain Nicholmouse started a new life as a business mouse, fulfilling his great-aunt's wishes. His travelling and adventuring was to stop, for a while at least. He didn't have any idea about the kind of business he would begin, but a few days after the reading of the will, he was introduced to Miss Abigail Saunders, a rather glamorous young business advisor. Much to his surprise, they soon worked out the perfect business plan. It was quite brilliant. The adventurous mouse would start his own airborne delivery company, which combined his true passions, flying and travel. "Why don't you call the company Debonair?" suggested Abigail. "I like it," replied Captain Nicholmouse enthusiastically. And so, without further discussion, the company got its name. Although the formality of business life had never appealed to Captain Nicholmouse, he had always been renowned for his excellent timekeeping. Even during his world travels, he could be relied upon to arrive everywhere on time. He was also an extremely cheerful and polite mouse, and it didn't take long for good word to spread of his new, reliable delivery company. Debonair quickly gained an excellent reputation, and in no time at all had some very prestigious customers. Anyone that knew Captain Nicholmouse also knew that he loved food. He never missed a meal. To his delight, one of Debonair's new customers was a cheesecake manufacturer. "Abigail, could we order one of those scrumptious cheesecakes every week?" he said, almost licking his lips. She replied, smiling. "The cheesecake manufacturer is so pleased with the prompt delivery service that they will be sending a complimentary deluxe cheesecake to us every Monday." Captain Nicholmouse leaned back in his office chair and patted his tummy with both hands. He was finding that the world of business was far more enjoyable than he'd imagined. Now, it was on a day that Captain Nicholmouse had to make a delivery of these delicious cheesecakes to a small island airport that his talent for invention and his adventurous spirit would prove invaluable. It was autumn, and there had been some fierce storms for several days. So one morning, after a particularly stormy night, there was a break in the weather, and so he set off on his first delivery of the day to the small island airport. The flight took him over the coast and out across the sea. It was his favourite trip. Suddenly his ears pricked up as a faint message crackled on an emergency channel of the aeroplane's radio. "Mayday, Mayday! This is Fishing Boat Islander, 10 miles south of Woody Bay. Taking water and sinking. Require immediate assistance. Total crew 4. Over." Captain Nicholmouse listened as the Coast Guard replied, He wished he could help, but his delivery aeroplane was just not suitable for a sea rescue. Anyway, it was now time for him to land at the island airport, so he changed the frequency to contact the airport control tower and arrange his landing. But he just couldn't get the thought of the stranded fishermen out of his mind. He was eager to reach the end of the runway after landing. All he wanted to do was find out how the rescue was going. He headed straight to the control tower. He was sure they would have the latest information. Captain Nicholmouse was so concerned about the fishermen that he even forgot the cup of tea and the morning snack that was usually waiting for him while his aeroplane was being unloaded. "Is there any news about the sinking boat?" he asked as soon as he got into the control tower. Not good," the air traffic controller replied. "The Coast Guard lost radio contact with them about 5 minutes ago. More storms are moving in fast, and if the boat isn't reached in the next couple of hours, I'm afraid the fishermen will be lost." "Lost?" exclaimed the mouse. Surely the lifeboat could reach them in that time without any problem, he thought. The air traffic controller continued to explain. "You see, the lifeboat was damaged in last night's storm." Captain Nicholmouse frowned. He was becoming increasingly worried. "So why not use the Coast Guard's helicopter?" he asked. "The tail propeller was hit by lightning a couple of days ago. It's being repaired but won't be ready for several hours," answered the air traffic controller solemnly. This was not the response that Captain Nicholmouse had expected. He turned and looked out of the control tower window. Dark storm clouds were menacing in the distance. Things were looking quite hopeless for the fisherman. He stood deep in thought, stroking his whiskers for a while, then blinked. Almost as though he was switching on a new thought, he opened his eyes wide. He suddenly had an inspired rescue idea. Quite literally, a stroke of genius. Everyone in the air traffic control tower was busy working when Captain Nicholmouse suddenly blurted out, "Is there a pleasure boat company near the seashore?" "Yes," replied the air traffic controller, turning from his busy radar screen and looking somewhat puzzled by the strange question. "Quick, I need a telephone," said the mouse, and with that he sped out of the room into a nearby office. Within moments the control tower door burst open. It was Captain Nicholmouse again, and this time he had a huge smile on his face. "Some banana boats will be here in 10 minutes, he announced triumphantly. "What will be here?" the confused air traffic controller replied, thinking that perhaps he had misheard. "Banana boats," replied Captain Nicholmouse. "We're going to make a seaplane and rescue those fishermen," he continued. "I'll need all the help I can get. Will you come with me so that I can explain to the airport mechanics?" The air traffic controller was speechless. How could banana boats be used to make a seaplane, he wondered. But he left his desk and went with Captain Nicholmouse to meet the mechanics. As they walked, the mouse explained everything to him, and he was soon convinced by the ingenious plan. Once inside the aircraft hangar, the air traffic controller confidently introduced him to the team of mechanics. "As you all know, the lives of 4 fishermen are in danger," he said. "The only way to save them is to make an air-sea rescue, and Captain Nicholmouse has a plan to do just that." Captain Nicholmouse then began to explain the details to the mechanics. "With your help, I plan to transform my delivery plane into a seaplane. That way I can make a sea landing and rescue the 4 men." The mechanics listened silently at first, but as the mouse explained everything with such enthusiasm and determination, their faces began to brighten. Now they too could see hope for a rescue. "A local pleasure boat company will be delivering 2 banana boats any minute now. I'll need your help to attach these inflatables to my aeroplane," he explained. "I'm hoping they will provide enough buoyancy to keep the aircraft afloat for a sea landing." By the time that Captain Nicholmouse had finished talking, all the mechanics were turning to each other and nodding. They were itching to get to work on the seaplane. The chief mechanic then spoke for all of them. "Just tell us exactly what to do." So the mouse handed him a list of all the items needed to build the seaplane, and straight away everybody started running around to collect them. The side of the runway became a hive of activity, and within 30 minutes the strange yellow banana boats were securely fixed to the aeroplane. Together, the mouse and the mechanics had thought of everything. The rest of the cargo of cheesecakes was unloaded, and an inflatable dinghy was loaded on board so that once the seaplane had landed, Captain Nicholmouse could row and collect the fishermen from the sinking boat. "There's only one way to find out if this aeroplane's going to fly," said Captain Nicholmouse, smiling at the team of mechanics. Everyone nodded in agreement, and he climbed aboard the new seaplane. Just before he shut the cabin door, he turned and shouted back, "Will someone contact my office and let them know that I won't be able to make the other deliveries today?" The chief mechanic waved a thumbs up to say that he would take care of this. Abigail Saunders was shocked and surprised to receive his phone call, but after the chief mechanic had finished explaining, she said, "Yes, I understand." Then she added, "I knew that it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. Captain Nicholmouse is an adventurer, you know." The aeroplane looked awkward moving down the runway with its bright yellow floats. Captain Nicholmouse was quickly given permission for takeoff and he moved the aeroplane forward. The team of mechanics stood at the side of the runway, watching and hoping that their new seaplane would fly. They all admired the ingenious brave mouse for his determination and his inspired rescue plan. Captain Nicholmouse opened the throttle fully and the aeroplane gathered speed. The controls felt so heavy with the extra load of the huge floats, but as the aeroplane went faster, he soon felt it lifting off the runway. "Yes!" he cried. "I knew it would fly, I knew it!" A huge cry went up from all the mechanics on the ground too. "He's done it! The seaplane is flying!" Now the fishermen really stood a chance of being rescued. Before long, Captain Nicholmouse was flying out over the sea. Dark storm clouds were covering more and more of the sky. The storm could strike at any moment and make a sea landing impossible. Then he would be forced to abandon any attempt of a rescue and return to the island airport. Time was not on his side. Keeping an ear to the radio and an eye to the sea, Captain Nicholmouse looked out of the miles of grey water, hoping to catch sight of the fishing boat. He could have done with an extra set of eyes. But just then, as he started to wonder whether Abigail would make a good co-pilot, he glimpsed a red dot amidst all the murky water. He flew in closer to take a better look. It was the fishermen, and one man was standing on the boat waving some kind of flag. He'd found them. Captain Nicholmouse gently circled the area, trying to work out a plan for landing. Now he could see that the fishing boat had capsized, and he knew that it wouldn't stay afloat for long. He needed to make the landing as smooth as possible. If the landing failed, he knew that there would be no hope for any of them. "Gently, gently," he said to himself as he prepared to land. He was very nervous. He could feel his hands tighten around the aeroplane's controls. His heart was pounding loudly in his chest. And as he put the aeroplane into its descent, he continued to say to himself, "It'll be fine. I'll land, collect the men, and we'll be home in time for tea." He was determined to save the fishermen. First, a huge spray of water covered the aeroplane's windscreen. Then the aeroplane started to be bumped around, so much so that the mouse was bounced in his seat and almost bumped his head on the cockpit ceiling. The plane had landed. The aircraft drifted gently to a stop, and it was staying afloat. The banana floats had worked. Captain Nicholmouse reminded himself that time was not on his side, so without delay he moved from the cockpit and flung the cabin door open. Now he could hear shouts from the fishermen. Over here, hurry!" The sea was starting to get choppy. The upturned boat seemed to be about 50 metres away. Quickly, Captain Nicholmouse grabbed the dinghy, pulled the inflate cord and threw the little rescue boat out of the cabin door. By the time it hit the water, it was almost inflated. Then, clutching the oars, he jumped out of the aeroplane himself and landed neatly in the waiting dinghy. The sea was still getting rougher, and the darkening sky looked like a huge curtain being drawn across the sun. With the oars in position, Captain Nicholmouse rowed furiously. Every second counted. When he finally arrived at the upturned boat, he was gasping for breath, and he just managed to say to the fishermen, "Get in quickly!" The 4 men were exhausted and extremely wet. They got into the dinghy silently, so relieved to be rescued at last. It was then that Captain Nicholmouse could see that they had been using one of the men's coats as the red flag. To his surprise, not one of them even commented on the unusual rescue plane with its yellow floats. Minutes later, they were back at the aeroplane. Captain Nicholmouse's arms were aching from all the rowing, and the wind had now started to blow angrily. He gave some final instructions to the fishermen as he climbed aboard. I'll start the engine. We need to take off quickly before the sea gets any rougher, he continued. You'll find blankets and flasks of hot tea in the cabin. Make yourselves as comfortable as possible. With one last thought, he added, when you're all aboard, let me know. Oh, and please pull the dinghy in too. Hopefully we won't need it again, but it's best to be prepared. They all knew what Captain Nicholmouse meant. Until they were back on dry ground again, none of them would be safe. With the storm threatening to break at any moment and the waves getting bigger, Captain Nicholmouse rushed to get the seaplane airborne again as quickly as possible. He moved as fast as he could, trying to start the engine and putting on his radio headset all at the same time. He'd been concentrating so hard on the rescue that he hadn't been in touch with the island airport since leaving. Pushing the radio transmit button, he said excitedly, Island Control Tower, this is Captain Nicholmouse. I've got them. And again, I've got them. Over? The radio crackled and hissed, but there was no reply. Still he was trying the engine, and still he kept the radio transmissions going. Then finally the engine roared into life. As it did, he felt a hand tap on his shoulder, and he turned around. We're all aboard, shouted one of the fishermen over all the engine noise. Great, said Captain Nicholmouse. Let's get you home. By now the wind was very strong, and the fisherman and Captain Nicholmouse were being rattled about inside the aeroplane. The propeller whizzed around, but with all the waves and the seaplane controls feeling so heavy and clumsy, the mouse couldn't tell if they were moving forward at all. Out at the corner of his eye, he caught another glimpse of the sinking boat. Surely they must be moving, he thought. Then, all of a sudden, the controls felt lighter, and he realised that at last the aeroplane had left its watery runway. Hooray! He shouted. Hooray! We've done it! We're going home! Captain Nicholmouse had rescued the 4 men just in time. The black clouds followed the aeroplane all the way back to the island, but it seemed as though he was able to outrun them. He had almost given up on the radio when it crackled again, and he heard, Captain Nicholmouse, this is the Island Airport Control Tower. Are you receiving? Over. Immediately he replied, This is Captain Nicholmouse. Rescue complete. We'll be with you in 10 minutes. Over. Congratulations, boomed the reply. We had lost your signal and feared the worst. Well done. I repeat, well done. Over. Soon the cliffs at Woody Bay were in sight. They were nearly home. By the time the aeroplane finally approached the airport to land, the sky was almost black. The runway lights were on and they looked very welcoming. For the first time that day, Captain Nicholmouse started to feel hungry. Maybe I'll have some cheesecake when we land, he thought. With all the events of the past few hours, he had almost forgotten that he'd missed his morning snack, and now lunch too. He then started to wonder about his customers and the cancelled deliveries. Never mind, he thought, I've got very important cargo on board now. When Captain Nicholmouse finally felt the aeroplane wheels touch down on the runway, he let out a huge sigh of relief. Phew, he said. This has been an unusual day's flying. He'd enjoyed it. With the aeroplane safely on solid ground once more and the engine stopped, he moved from the cockpit into the cabin. We're home, he said to the 4 rescued fishermen. Then he threw open the cabin door and a large crowd rushed to meet them. The town mayor, a local newspaper journalist, the fishermen's families, and many more. Captain Nicholmouse saw some camera flashes, but all he wanted to do was have a hot cup of tea and an extremely large piece of cheesecake. Or maybe 2. He squeezed through the crowd and headed straight toward the canteen, the air traffic controller following closely on his heels. You'll have to stay on the island tonight, said the air traffic controller. Miss Saunders has booked a hotel for you, and the mechanics will sort out your aeroplane. The mouse's ears twitched as he added, because the rest of the cheesecakes couldn't be delivered on time, the manufacturer has donated them to everyone involved with the rescue. The air traffic controller continued to talk about interviews with journalists and many other important things, but Captain Nicholmouse just turned and smiled. Is there any cheesecake left? He said. I'm hungry. When Captain Nicholmouse finally sat down to eat his cheesecake, he thought of Great Aunt Maud. She would have been so pleased with the success of his business, and she would have been extremely proud of him today. Then he stroked his whiskers for a while. He blinked. Suddenly his eyes opened wide. he'd had an idea for his next business investment. He would buy a seaplane, and he would call it Maud, of course. The end. A spontaneity production, making things happen.